Hey guys, it's Missy all here to do lesson 7.7 with you. Your learning target for today's lesson is I will be able to write two-step equations. Your thing about it says, two students were asked to write an algebraic equation to represent the description below. The product of 5 and the sum of a number and 3 is 20. Here is their work. We've got Lisa's work and we have Maria's work. So it looks like they marked up the text and then they drew separate different bar models. So it's asking you, whose work do you agree with and why? Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can do the think about it on your own. Alright guys, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to mark up my text. I want to mark up the phrase so that I know what I'm expecting. Just like they marked up their phrase, we're going to mark up ours. So the product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So I'm going to be multiplying, like so I'm going to be multiplying 5 and the sum of, so this means I'm going to be adding a number and 3 is 20. So remember, anytime it says is a number, that means equals that number. So is 20 means equals 20. So let's look at each of the work that they produced. So let's look at Lisa on the left. So she drew her total bar, which was 20. That is correct because with multiplication, that one is directly behind the equal sign. So it looks like they both did that correctly. Lisa drew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 ends, and then she also added a 3, and that's supposed to equal 20. Okay, so that's exactly what she got. Let's look at Maria. So Maria has n plus 3 as the group size, and then it says that she has 5 groups. So that means she's multiplying this group size by 5, and that should equal 20. So who did the work properly? I agree with Maria. Because when it says the sum of a number and 3, I must use parentheses to guarantee the sum actually happens first. We want them to be added together before we multiply by 5. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We have a key point for today. Our key point says, when translating two-step equations, we can use grouping symbols to preserve the correct order. So it's when translating, that means kind of like when trying to understand, right? So like when I translate words from Spanish to English, I'm trying to understand what these Spanish words mean in my language, English. So translating just trying to figure out what the meaning is. So when we try to figure out the meaning of a two-step equation, we use grouping symbols, and those are like parentheses or brackets or these weird little curly ones to preserve the correct order. That preserve means to keep the same. So we want to keep the correct order the same. All right, so interaction with the new material. Example number 1 says, write an equation that represents the phrase 12 less than the quotient of n and 8 is 9. So let's start marking up our text. It says 12 less than, so I'm going to circle 12, box less than. Less than is telling me that I'm going to subtract. How much am I going to be subtracting? 12. Usually when it says less than, you want to go to the number to the left, because that's how much it's saying is less than, so that's the amount you're taking away. So let's keep going. The quotient is the answer to a division problem, so we're going to be dividing. Looks like we'll be dividing n and 8, and then, oops, I should have circled that one. And then is 9 means equals 9. Okay, so it looks like we want the quotient of, this is going to be in parentheses. Because since we're taking 12 away from that quotient, the quotient is the answer. So that means I have to have n divided by 8, so I know what that answer is, in order to proceed. So we're also working with a subtraction problem. Yes, I know we have to divide here, but ultimately, because I'm taking away from that quotient, this is going to be a subtraction problem. So when we have a subtraction problem, we have a total, and we have two different parts. Since we are taking away from that quotient, it means that that quotient of n and 8 is our total. So that's going to be a division problem, n divided by 8. So I'm going to draw a model. This is my total bar, and it's represented by n divided by 8. Okay, then our other parts are going to be 12, the part that we take away, and then 9, our answer to the equation. So I'm going to draw a second bar, cut it into two parts, label one 12 and the other 9. Now we want to write an equation that is represented by the phrase. So remember we said we want n divided by 8 to happen first. Okay, so that's going to be in the first position. And remember, our total, when we divide, is going to be our dividend. And our dividend is always in the first position. Okay, so we're going to do n divided by 8, but I'm going to represent that as a fraction just because that's the way you're going to see it more frequently. Okay, and then it says we have to subtract 12. So we're taking away this part here. So minus 12, and then it gives us that resulting answer of 9. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try and solve for our variable. Since we don't know our total, we know the parts. Let's go ahead and simplify the parts that we know. So we know that when we divide n by 8, it's going to equal 12 plus 9 if I add those together, right? Because the length of the 12 plus 9 bar needs to be equal to the length of the n divided by 8 bar. Okay, so if I simplify this side right here, n divided by 8 equals 12 plus 9 is 21. Now remember, our goal is to get n by itself. In this case, it didn't happen so easily for us. So remember I taught you about inverse or opposite operations. So remember, fractions represent a mini division problem. So the opposite of division would be to multiply. So if I multiplied the left side by 8, I would just be left with n. But then I would have to multiply the other side by 8 because of that equal sign. Both sides need to be equal. If I do some to one side, I need to do it to the other. All right, so when I multiply 21 times 8, I get 168. So the only thing I want to do then is just check and see if this value of n equals 168 works in our equation that we wrote for our phrase. So I put 168 divided by 8 minus 12 equals 9. Okay, so when we simplify 168 divided by 8, I get 21. And then I subtract 12, is supposed to give me 9. 21 minus 12 is 9, and 9 equals 9. So it is true. So the correct equation for that phrase is n divided by 8 minus 12 equals 9. And see, there's different ways you can say it. All right, example number 2. It says write an equation that represents the phrase the quotient of 4 1/2 and the difference between the number and 3/4 is 3. So let's mark up the text. All right, we have a quotient, which we already talked about means division. Looks like we'll be dividing 4.5, and then the difference of. So when I see the difference, this is going to tell me parentheses. Difference is a keyword, and that's telling me that I'm subtracting. What am I going to be subtracting? A number, and then 3/4. And then is 3 means equals 3. So since we're working with the division problem, remember, our total is going to be our dividend, the number we're dividing, and in that case, that number is 4.5. We're going to be dividing 4.5 by this difference. So total is going to equal 4.5. And let's draw that bar model. Since we're working with the division problem, I'll be having groups, number of groups and group sizes. So number of groups and group sizes. So remember, in a division problem, our final answer, the quotient, can actually be either the number of groups or the group size. So it's going to be easier to draw 3 groups versus having to draw n minus 3/4 groups. So let's go ahead and do group number is 3. So I'll draw a bar model equal in length and cut into 3 pieces. And that means that the group size is going to be this n minus 3/4. So n minus 3/4 is going to go inside each box. Okay, so we need to build an equation based on the phrase. So it says the quotient of, so that means we are starting with 4.5. That is the first number, and that's actually our total to the problem. And then we're going to be dividing it by the difference of. Now that means I need to put parentheses in order to make sure that this subtraction problem happens before I actually divide, because it's the quotient of 4.5 and that difference. So if I don't do the difference first, I won't have a difference to divide by. So I need to do n minus 3/4, and then that's going to give us 3. We need the parentheses first because according to the order of operations, division is performed before subtraction. I need to find the difference first, or there is no difference to divide with as needed. Okay, so 1 bar, we're going to take 4.5, okay, and we're actually going to divide it by the 3 groups that we have. So divided by 3, and that should give us our group size. So n minus 3/4, which is our group size. So let's start simplifying the equation as best as we can. So 4.5 divided by 3, when you put that in the calculator, 4.5 divided by 3 gives you 1.5, which equals n minus, and let's go ahead and change this to a decimal. 3/4 is the same thing as 3 out of 4/4, which is usually 75 cents. Now we still don't have our variable all by itself, but remember up here I told you we can use inverse operations. Okay, so the opposite operation of subtraction would be to add. So we're going to add 0.75 to each side. So when I add 0.75 to this side, I get 2.25. And when I add it to the right side, negative 0.75 plus positive 0.75 gives us 0. So that means n minus 0, so we just have n. So it looks like n is going to equal 2 1/4, or 2.25. Let's put it back into a fraction since that's what we were using before. So 25 cents is 1/4, so 1 out of 4. Okay, so let's perform a quick check to make sure we got the right variable. and we're going to put it into our original expression, which is this one here. So we have 4.5 divided by n, which is 2 1/4, minus 3/4 should equal 3. So I have to solve within here first. So 2 1/4 minus 1/4 gives us 1.5. And we need to divide 4.5 by 1.5 and see if that equals 3. So 4.5 divided by 1/2 does give me 3. And 3 equals 3, so we did get it correct. So our proper answer to this is 4.5 divided by the difference of n minus 3/4 equals 3. Now notice on this one, we had to use grouping symbols. We needed those grouping symbols because we needed to make sure that the subtraction was done before the division was done. According to order of operations, division gets performed before subtraction, but if I use parentheses around my subtraction problem, parentheses happens before division in the order of operations. So I keep that difference, making sure that that difference happens first. I need to preserve it with the grouping symbols, so parentheses in this case. Alright guys, this is a pretty tough lesson, so if you need any help, make sure you write down any questions, and I will see you for our